July 23, 1983, 8 p.m., high above central Canada. The sky is calm and endless. Air Canada Flight 143 cruises at 41,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, everything feels routine. The engines hum steadily and the instruments glow softly. Passengers sit relaxed, reading, resting, and looking out the windows, unaware of anything unusual. Then, suddenly, a warning light appears. Low fuel pressure. Another warning follows. Then another. The cockpit atmosphere shifts instantly. This is no longer routine. The captain studies the indicators, trying to make sense of what he is seeing. Could it be a simple pump failure? Two systems failing at once makes no sense, especially in a brand new aircraft, if the systems are correct. Then something is wrong with the fuel supply itself. But how could that happen? Before we go deeper into this flight, if you enjoy real aviation investigations like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are watching from. Because what happens next will challenge everything the crew thinks they know about this aircraft. To understand what really happened, we need to go back to the beginning of the flight. It is July 20. Air Canada Flight 143 prepares for departure from Montreal to Edmonton. On board are 61 passengers and 8 crew members. The weather is clear and calm. Nothing suggests that this routine flight will soon turn into a life-threatening emergency high above the ground. The aircraft is a Boeing 767, one of the newest aircraft in the Air Canada fleet. It has only 150 hours of flight time. This plane represents a major shift in aviation. Many traditional systems have been replaced by digital displays and automated processes. The flight engineer position has been removed because it is unexpected and completely out of place. The captain looks closer. What do we have here? Something's wrong with the engines. He is 48 years old with more than 15,000 hours of flight experience. Calm and highly skilled, he has handled many complex situations before. Beside him is First Officer Maurice Quintal, who also has thousands of hours in the air but limited experience on the Boeing 767. This aircraft is new to both pilots, and that lack of familiarity will soon become important. Among the passengers is Rick Dion, an aircraft maintenance engineer traveling with his wife and young son Juan. He is excited to fly on this new aircraft and even visits the cockpit to observe the modern systems. The displays look different from older aircraft. Everything is digital and automated. It is clear that aviation is entering a new era. But not everyone fully understands how these new systems behave in abnormal situations. The flight departs smoothly and climbs to cruising altitude without any issues. Soon the aircraft levels off high above the jet stream. Flying at this altitude improves fuel efficiency and avoids turbulence. Everything is stable. The engines are performing normally. The passengers are comfortable for a moment. It feels like a perfect flight. But then the first warning appears and everything begins to change. A low fuel pressure.
Oh God, look at that!
No. Warning lights up on the panel. At first, the captain assumes it is a simple pump issue. Fuel pumps can fail, and the aircraft is designed with redundancy. One failed pump should not cause a serious problem. The system can compensate, and the flight can continue safely. But before the crew can fully assess the situation, a second warning appears from another fuel pump. Now the situation becomes more concerning. 2 pumps showing low pressure at the same time is highly unusual, especially in a new aircraft. The crew begins to question what they are seeing. Could both pumps really be failing? Or is there another explanation? Because in aviation, when multiple systems show the same issue, it often points to a deeper problem that is not immediately visible. To understand the danger, the crew must consider how fuel systems work. Large tanks store fuel which is pumped into the engines. Electric pumps maintain pressure to ensure a steady flow. If pressure drops, it can mean a pump failure or a lack of fuel in the tank. That second possibility is far more dangerous bet, because if there is no fuel, the engines will eventually stop. The crew checks their instruments for confirmation. Flight management computer shows that fuel levels are normal. According to the system, there is enough fuel to reach Edmonton without any issues. But there is a major problem. The digital fuel gauges are completely inoperative. This means the crew cannot directly measure how much fuel is actually in the tanks. Now the situation becomes unclear. The warnings suggest a possible fuel problem, but the computer indicates everything is fine. Without working gauges, the crew must rely on calculations rather than real-time data. If those calculations are wrong, then their entire understanding of the situation is wrong. And in aviation, relying on incorrect information can quickly become fatal. As the warnings continue to spread across more fuel pumps, the crew begins to lose confidence in the system. This no longer looks like isolated failures. Something is affecting the entire fuel supply. But what exactly is happening inside the aircraft? And why do the systems provide conflicting information? The uncertainty grows with every passing minute as the aircraft continues forward. The captain decides not to take any chances. Even though the computer shows sufficient fuel, he chooses to divert the flight to Winnipeg. It is the nearest major airport with full maintenance support. If there is a serious issue, it is safer to land early rather than continue the journey. Air traffic control clears the aircraft to descend and gives them direct routing to the airport. As the aircraft begins descending from 41,000 feet, the situation continues to worsen. More low. Fuel pressure low, engine 1 flameout, we're losing power.
Master caution, severe imbalance. We're going down.
Mayday, Mayday, Air Canada 157. As the crew tries to manage a problem they still do not fully understand. Every system seems to tell a different story, and none of them provide a clear answer. The cabin crew is informed of a possible issue, and we are doing everything we can to resolve it. Begins preparing for an emergency landing. Passengers are instructed to stay seated and remain calm. Inside the cockpit, the crew hopes these warnings are false. But deep down, the situation escalates. The left engine shuts down. The sound changes instantly as one of the engines goes silent. The aircraft begins to lose thrust, and the reality becomes impossible to ignore. This is not just a warning system problem. The aircraft is losing power. The crew now knows that fuel starvation is a real possibility. And if one engine has stopped, the second engine may not be far behind. The captain immediately begins procedures for a single-engine landing. He focuses on getting the aircraft safely on the ground before the situation worsens. But a new question emerges. If the second engine also fails, then this aircraft will lose all power. And no pilot is trained to land a modern jet without engines. The aircraft continues descending toward Winnipeg. One engine is already gone. The second engine is still running, but for how long? Every second now matters, because if the final engine stops before they reach the runway, this flight will become something far more dangerous than anyone on board has imagined. What happens when both engines fail in mid-air? And how do you control an aircraft that suddenly has no power at all? At 26,000 feet, the aircraft is no longer stable. One engine is already gone, and the remaining engine is struggling to maintain power. Inside the cockpit, the sound has changed. It is quieter now.
Too quiet.
The captain keeps his focus on the instruments, but something feels wrong. The warnings have not stopped. Instead, they are spreading, and then suddenly the second engine begins to fail. For a brief moment, there is hesitation. Then silence. Both engines shut down. The aircraft loses all thrust instantly and begins to glide. The cockpit screens flicker. Most of the electronic displays disappear. The systems that once controlled the aircraft are now gone. The captain realizes this is something no training has prepared them for. A modern jetliner, without engines, without power. Engines are gone. On the ground, the controller pauses for a second. This situation is almost unthinkable. A large passenger aircraft has effectively become a glider, and no one knows if it can reach the airport, or even stay in the air long enough to try. Inside the aircraft, the situation becomes even more critical. That means limited control, limited instruments, and almost no margin for error. So how does the aircraft remain controllable at all? There is one system left. A small device hidden beneath the fuselage deploys automatically. It is called a ram air turbine. As the aircraft moves through the air, this small propeller spins and generates power. just enough to provide basic control of the aircraft. It is not much, but it is the only thing keeping the plane from becoming completely uncontrollable. The captain feels the aircraft respond slightly as this system activates. Control is limited, but it is still there. The aircraft is now gliding through the sky in
Complete silence.
no engine noise, no normal systems, just airflow and gravity. The captain must now think differently. This is no longer powered flight. This is a glide, and every decision must account for altitude and distance. But there is a problem. They do not know exactly where they are. When the engines failed, the aircraft also lost its transponder signal. On the radar screen, the plane disappears. Air traffic control can no longer track its exact position. They switch to a different radar system that relies on reflections rather than signals, but it is the only option. Slowly, they begin to locate the aircraft again. The controller estimates the distance. About 60 miles from Winnipeg, 45 miles from a smaller airfield called Gimli. For the first time since losing power, the crew has a rough idea of where they are. But another question becomes critical. Can they glide far enough to reach a runway? And if not, where will they land? Inside the cockpit, the first officer begins calculating their glide profile. He compares altitude to distance. He tries to estimate how far the aircraft can travel before reaching the ground. But many of the instruments needed for accurate calculation are no longer working. He must rely on basic estimates and experience. The numbers are not encouraging. The aircraft losing altitude faster than expected. The captain looks ahead and finally sees Winnipeg in the distance. It appears close, within reach, but appearances can be misleading at this altitude. The first officer continues calculating. Then he reaches a conclusion. They will not make it. At their current descent rate, the aircraft will fall short by several miles. That realization changes everything. If they continue toward Winnipeg, they risk crashing short of the runway. But there is another option, Gimli, a former military airbase closer, within possible gliding distance. The first officer knows this airfield from his past training. He suggests it as an alternative. It may be their only chance. The captain. He hesitates for a moment. Winnipeg has full emergency services. Gimli does not. But distance matters more than equipment now, because reaching any runway is better than missing one completely. The decision is made. They turn toward Gimli. In the cabin, the situation feels different. The silence is unsettling. Passengers begin to sense something is wrong. The crew prepares them for an emergency landing on. Instructions are given. Brace positions are explained. People listen carefully. Their families close. Others begin to write final messages. The reality of the situation is starting to sink in. Back in the cockpit, the aircraft continues to descend. The captain focuses on controlling the glide, without engines. He cannot adjust speed using thrust. He must rely on pitch and drag. Every movement changes the aircraft path. Too fast and they overshoot. Too slow and they stall. The margin is extremely narrow. Gimli comes into view. But something is not right. The aircraft is too high, too fast. Without flaps and hydraulic systems, they cannot slow down easily. A normal approach is no longer possible. He considers a turn. A full circle could reduce altitude. But they do not have enough height to complete it safely. So he chooses a different option. A maneuver rarely used in large aircraft. A side slip. This technique is common in gliders. By turning the aircraft slightly sideways into the airflow, it creates drag. This allows the aircraft to descend more steeply without increasing forward speed. But there is a problem. This maneuver is almost never used in a commercial jet, and the captain has never performed it in this aircraft before. He decides to try anyway. The aircraft tilts. One wing drops. The nose remains angled. The plane begins to slip sideways through the air. Altitude drops quickly. The descent becomes steeper. For a moment it works, but inside the cabin the motion feels unnatural. Angle is extreme. Passengers look out and see the ground rushing up at a strange angle. The captain carefully adjusts the controls. He must balance descent and speed perfectly. Too much drag, and the aircraft could stall. Too little, and they will overshoot the runway. Every second now is critical. The ground is approaching, and there is no second attempt. But just as the runway gets closer, a new problem appears.
The landing gear.
Without hydraulic power, it cannot be lowered normally. The first officer uses gravity to drop into place. The main gear locks successfully, but the nose gear does not. It remains unsecured. This means the aircraft may collapse forward on landing. But there is no time to fix it. They must. The runway is now clearly visible. But something unexpected comes into view, because the runway they are aiming for is no longer an active runway. What exactly is waiting for them on the ground? And can they still land safely without knowing what lies ahead? The aircraft is now only seconds away from touchdown now. The runway at Gimli is directly ahead, but something feels off. The surface looks different. There are markings that do not belong to an active airport. Then the realization hits. This is not a functioning runway anymore. It has been converted into a drag racing strip. People are on it. Families, cars, campers, completely unaware that a silent jetliner is descending toward them from the sky. Inside the cockpit, there is no time to react emotionally. The captain stays focused. He aligns the aircraft as best as possible. The descent angle is still steep. Speed is still high. Without flaps, he cannot slow down properly. Without engines, he cannot go around. This is the only attempt. Whatever happens next will happen on this approach. In the cabin, the passengers brace for impact. Instructions echo through the aircraft. Heads down, stay tight, remain still. The silence of the engines makes everything more intense. There is no roar, no warning, only the sound of air rushing past the fuselage as the ground rises. Back on the ground, the people at the strip begin to notice something unusual. A shadow.
What's that sound?
A shape. Then they see it. A large aircraft descending toward them at incredible speed. There is confusion, panic. Some freeze, others begin to run. But the aircraft is already too close. The captain pulls the nose slightly down. He flares the aircraft just before touchdown. The main landing gear strikes the ground hard. The impact is violent, but controlled. Tires explode under the stress. Smoke rises instantly. The aircraft bounces slightly and then slams down again. The runway surface races beneath them. Then the nose drops. Unsecured nose gear collapses immediately. The front of the aircraft crashes down and scrapes along the runway. Sparks fly. The metal grinds against asphalt. The sound is deafening. The aircraft is no longer fully under control. Ahead on the runway, two children are riding bicycles. They look up, and they see the aircraft. His only control now comes from differential braking on the main wheels. He presses harder on one side. The aircraft begins to veer, slowly at first, then more sharply. The children panic and try to move away. The aircraft rushes past them by a narrow margin, close enough for the captain to see the fear on their faces. There is no room for error. Not now. Not at this speed. The aircraft continues, sliding down the strip. The right engine scrapes along the ground, sending sparks into the air. Smoke thickens. The brakes are pushed to their limits. Heat builds rapidly. The tires struggle to hold. Then suddenly a guardrail appears installed down the center of the strip. The aircraft slams into it. The impact shakes the entire fuselage. The aircraft slows violently. Finally, after what feels like an endless slide, the motion stops. Silence returns once again. But this time, it is different. This time, it's on the ground, alive. For a moment, no one moves. Then the realization spreads through the cabin. They survived. Some passengers begin to cheer. Others sit in shock. Many are unable to process what just happened. They believed they would not survive. Now, they are sitting inside a damaged aircraft that somehow made you it to the ground down.
But the danger is not over. Smoke begins to fill the cabin.
The crew knows they have to act now, that after an emergency landing, fire is the greatest threat. They do not hesitate. Commands are shouted, evacuate.
Move, move, hurry!
The angle of the aircraft makes the slides extremely steep. Some struggle to descend. Others fall. Outside, people rush toward the plane with fire extinguishers. The smell of burning material fills the air. The front section of the aircraft is heavily damaged. The friction from the landing has ignited insulation inside the structure. Smoke continues to rise from the nose. Within minutes, the aircraft is empty. All 61 passengers and 8 crew members are safely out. Some are injured, most are shaken. But incredibly, no one has suffered life-threatening harm. Considering the circumstances, this outcome is almost impossible. A fully loaded jet losing both engines mid-air should not end like this. And yet, it did. The aircraft sits damaged on the strip, surrounded by smoke and debris. Emergency services begin to arrive. The scene quickly turns into an investigation site. Because now, a new question emerges. One that is just as important as the landing itself. How did this happen in the first war? Because modern aircraft do not simply run out of fuel. Not without warning. Not without explanation. Within hours, the story spreads across the world. A large passenger jet has landed without engines, a once-in-a-lifetime event. But for investigators, this is not about luck. It is about understanding. Because somewhere in the chain of events, something went wrong. And until that answer is found, it could happen again. The investigation begins almost immediately. Experts arrive at the scene. They examine the aircraft. They study the damage. They begin asking questions. The most important one is simple. Was the aircraft truly out of fuel, or was something else responsible for shutting down both engines?
The logs don't match the pressure readings. Look here.
Because if the aircraft did run out of fuel, then the next question becomes even more disturbing. How does a modern jet take off without enough fuel to complete its flight? By the next morning, investigators arrive at the scene. The aircraft is still sitting on the ground at Gimli, damaged, but largely intact. For them, the miracle landing is not the focus. Their job is to understand why it happened. Because aircraft do not lose both engines in normal flight, and they certainly do not run out of fuel without a reason.
Something in the system failed long before the engine stopped.
The gauge readings indicate a significant discrepancy in the fuel flow. Question is simple. Was the aircraft actually out of fuel? Investigators begin by checking the fuel tanks. They drain what little remains inside. The result is shocking. Less than 20 gallons of fuel are found.
What?
This aircraft is capable of carrying nearly 24,000 gallons. What remains is almost nothing. The conclusion is unavoidable. The aircraft ran completely out of fuel in mid-air. But that answer creates a bigger mystery. How did the crew allow a modern aircraft to run dry? The next step is to determine whether the fuel was lost during flight. Investigators search the aircraft carefully. They look for any signs of leakage, any damage that could explain fuel loss. They inspect the wings, the fuel lines, internal compartments, even the sealed areas deep inside the structure. But they find nothing. No leaks, no damage, no evidence that fuel escaped during flight. That leads to only one possible conclusion. The aircraft took off without enough fuel. Now the investigation shifts to the ground operations before departure. Investigators review fueling procedures. They speak with maintenance crews. They examine records from Montreal. According to the logs, the aircraft was checked manually because its fuel gauges were not working. That part is confirmed. The crew used a dripstick method to measure fuel levels inside the tanks. So if the fuel was measured manually, then how did they get it wrong? The answer lies in something surprisingly simple. Units. Aircraft fuel must be calculated by weight. Pilots need to know how many kilograms of fuel are on board. But fueling trucks measure fuel by volume. That means liters. To convert between these two, volume must be multiplied by a density factor to get weight. It is a routine process, done countless times every day. But on this flight, something went wrong. At the time, the airline was transitioning from imperial units to metric units. Some procedures used pounds. Others used kilograms. This created confusion among the crew and ground staff. During fueling, the numbers were converted incorrectly. The calculation used a factor meant for pounds instead of kilograms. The result was devastating. The aircraft received less than half the required fuel. But the crew did not know this, because the faulty fuel gauge system had already removed their ability to verify the actual fuel quantity. The digital processor that controlled the gauges had failed due to a small internal defect. A tiny component inside the system had been manufactured incorrectly. This caused the entire fuel indication system to stop. So the crew relied entirely on calculations.
Calculations that were wrong.
And that combination created the perfect failure chain. A broken gauge system removed direct measurement. Human error introduced incorrect fuel calculations. The aircraft departed with insufficient fuel without anyone realizing it. But without accurate fuel data, the crew interpreted them as system malfunctions rather than fuel starvation. Investigation now reveals a critical lesson. No single failure caused this event. It was a chain, a technical fault, a procedural gap, a human error. Each one alone would not have caused a disaster, but together they nearly did. Investigators also examined training procedures. They find that crews were not fully prepared for the transition between measurement systems. There was no clear standard, no consistent method. This allowed confusion to enter a process that required absolute precision. Introduced fueling procedures are standardized. Unit conversions are clarified. Training is improved to ensure no ambiguity exists between kilograms and pounds. Aircraft systems are also updated to provide better redundancy for fuel measurement, so that a single failure cannot remove all fuel information from the cockpit. The incident becomes known around the world, a Boeing 767 that ran out of fuel at cruising altitude and landed safely without engines. It is later given a name that reflects what happened, the Gimli Glider. But behind that name is a serious lesson, one that continues to influence aviation safety today. Technology can fail, humans can make mistakes, but systems must be designed so that one error does not lead to catastrophe. That is what makes this story so important. Not just because the aircraft landed safely, but because it should never have been in that situation at all. And that is why this case is still studied today. Because it proves that aviation safety is not just about flying. It is about understanding every system, every calculation, every decision. Well, if you found this investigation valuable, make sure to subscribe for more real aviation stories that reveal how small mistakes can lead to massive consequences, and sometimes how they are barely survived.